Welcome to the History Unplugged podcast, the unscripted show that celebrates unsung heroes, myth-busts historical lies, and rediscovers the forgotten stories that changed our world. I'm your host, Scott Rank.
All right, welcome back again, guys. I'm Steve Guerra, host of the History of the Papacy podcast, and I'm with Scott Rank of the History Unplugged podcast, and we are going to look at another movie that we hate. And today we are talking about the Da Vinci Code, so I'm sure that one's going to bring a lot of interesting emotions. So take it away, Scott. Take it away, Scott. Why don't you give us a little overview of this great film?
I don't even know where to start. Well, okay, I have to start with Dan Brown. Dan Brown is the William Shakespeare of bad writing, if that analogy makes any sense at all. No, I should say he's the Antichrist of William Shakespeare. He's one of the worst writers in the English language. And I mean, just to give you an idea of how the book Da Vinci Code starts out is renowned curator Jacques Sonner staggered through the vaulted archway of the museum's Grand Gallery. So the word renowned probably comes up about 6,000 times in his book. Everyone is renowned. And I thought with this podcast, Steve, actually, we should refer to each other as renowned podcasters. So I'm honored to be with you, the renowned podcaster, Steve Guerra. And there's a review of one of Dan Brown's most recent books in The Guardian. And the writer wrote in the style of Dan Brown. It's hilarious. He says, "Every night, renowned writer prayed to renowned deity, God, thanking him for his renowned wealth." And so, okay, Dan Brown, he's a bad writer. The other thing that I love is all of his books focus on the protagonist, Robert Langdon, a symbiology professor, which is not a profession, I should note. Iconography is a subfield of art history. Symbologist is not a real thing. Dan Brown, I don't think, even though his protagonist is a college professor at Harvard, I don't think he's ever been to college before, because he seems to think that the job of a professor is basically a children's librarian, where you say things and you startle your students. And the funniest scenes are when you flash back to Robert Langdon in class and says, "Now, class, did you know that people think that the medieval image of God with his beard came from Zeus?" And it describes the students getting wide-eyed as if they're children being read The Foolish Tortoise at story time. And so he's a silly... Okay, I don't want to get too far into Dan Brown's badness. We're going to come back to it. It's going to be hard to stay on track here. Don't like Dan Brown as a writer. The film Da Vinci Code, but all to say that the book was a smash success, sold hundreds of millions of copies. So it's inevitable that you would have a movie. The movie came out in 2006, all-star cast, Ron Howard director, starring Tom Hanks with hair that makes him look like a younger Joe Biden. Audrey Tautou, who was if you needed a French actress before Marion Cotillard became big in the last few years, that's who you would get. Amelie, if you saw that movie. Ian McKellen, Gandalf is in it. Paul Bettany, he's the homicidal albino monk. So that's the Da Vinci Code. And so all-star cast, a lot of money behind it, a lot of good production. Takes itself very seriously, interesting concept, packaged up in an airport fiction book. And I'm going to hop between the movie and the book a lot in this review. They really track pretty similar. The book is just more, the movie is more truncated, but there's very little difference between the two. So I don't know. Do you have anything to say, Steve, before I get into the synopsis?
Well, if I had to defend this movie, and you're really, really pushing me on, I have to defend this movie. That's my role today. I mean, Tom Hanks had cool hair. Symbology would probably be a cool major for a PhD if there was such a thing. I mean, you're really pushing me. This movie was, it was interesting. I will say one thing. When the book came out, when did the book come out? Around 2003, give or take. It did get a lot of children who I think this was more, I mean, even if it was written for an adult audience, it was definitely young adult caliber. It got, 13-year-olds who were first exploring that, though. I'm busting my church school teacher, my Sunday school teacher. It definitely got them involved in history. Now, whether they grew out and realized that maybe not everything in this novel was necessarily the truth, despite what Dan Brown claims, maybe it did get some teenagers interested in history.
Right. And in one sense, Dan Brown isn't indicted so much as humanity for being so interested in it. And you do have a point. I have met people who I could tell their ideas came from this book. So it's sort of like if you grew up watching WWE and you love Triple H and Stone Cold Steve Austin, and then that got you into serious martial arts, then that's sort of what Da Vinci Code is to understanding the past. So, I guess I should say, I'm going to dog on this completely, but something positive is the book is absolute total mind fodder. It is sugar in book form. If you have a long haul flight across an ocean, this is a great book. It's completely mindless, completely addictive. You forget about it the second you're done. So that's a good thing about it.
Yeah, my daughter always talks about books are like food. There's healthy food books, like healthy food, and then there's, like you said, there's eating a huge bag of Doritos.
Yeah, I was about to say pixie stick, but that's at least sugar. I'd say more like Dots, something that's pure corn syrup. So that's what it's 5 pounds of Dots or Red Vines you would get from Costco. Consumes great. What happens afterwards is negative. All right, so I should say what the plot is. Now, the idea is pretty interesting. Dan Brown did not come up with it, but it's a part of the controversy behind it. And it seems silly that this was such a big culture war issue back in 2003, this book of all things. But it's because it approaches a novel idea and it's revisionist history. So here's what it is. Basically, it starts with our renowned curator about to die by, spoiler alert, an albino monk. And the albino monk, or the curator, is a member of the Priory of Sion, this secret group that we'll learn about later. He is hiding. The monk is killing him to get the keystone, which is the MacGuffin in the book. In the movie, it's a critical item to search for the Holy Grail. Well, the French police can only call up one man to solve this, and that is renowned symbologist Robert Langdon and renowned cryptographer Sophie Neveu. And Dan Brown always has these throwaway female love interests who are cryptographers or biologists or whatever, but they're pretty interchangeable. So they find the keystone, then they find it's a cryptix that has to be unlocked by a clue. This is kind of like a Hardy Boys book. They need the help of another renowned scholar, Sir Lee Teabing, an Englishman who lives in a mansion who knows about the Holy Grail, played by Ian McKellen in the movie. They go to his mansion, and this is where you get the mother of all exposition dumps. In the movie, he actually shows a PowerPoint presentation. I'm not making it up. And he gives the whole, just kind of like what the thrust of the Da Vinci Code is, where Teabing thinks that Jesus didn't die. If you know your real history, that you would know based on the Gnostic Gospels that he actually married Mary Magdalene. They had children. And that the Holy Grail is the tomb of Mary Magdalene. So then another clue sends our scrappy band of our Scooby-Doo gang to Isaac Newton's tomb. And then this is where things get odd, where Dan Brown shows his peccadillos. That this gets into kind of like the primordial theories of matriarchy society, where before the patriarchy took over, there was a matriarchy and there were fertility rituals and stuff like that. And our French female protagonist says that her grandparents were involved in this to celebrate the sacred feminine. So that's a theme that comes out a lot, that there was the sacred feminine that was celebrated, and you can find it in the original interpretation of the Bible and the Gnostic Gospels, but it was gradually covered up by the Roman Empire, and then definitely covered up by the medieval Catholic Church and medieval society. But then freethinkers like Leonardo da Vinci and Isaac Newton hid clues in their works to show this kind of undercurrent, this sacred, secret, passed on knowledge, the cultic knowledge passed from person to person, to kind of reassert the sacred feminine. So then, in a Scooby-Doo reveal, T-Big shows that he's behind the curator's murder because he wants to find the Holy Grail, which he thinks is a series of documents that proves Jesus married Mary Magdalene and bore children, and he thinks that this will destroy the Vatican. Our female protagonist, Sophie, finds out she is a descendant of this union, and then finds out that the descendants are the Holy Grail, the Sangria, or the Sacred Blood. And then at the end of the book, Langdon finds out that the pyramid in front of the Louvre was commissioned and built by a member of the Priory of Sion, and it's actually over the tomb of Mary Magdalene. And that shows how deep the conspiracy really goes. So that's the overview. I'm going to get into why I don't like it, and this is going to be a lot to unpack, but anything you think, Steve, before I get into it?
Oh, it just, the whole movie, because it goes to the heart of what I do in my podcast as I talk about all these things, and there's just so much wrong with everything in the movie. Just basics are all wrong, but I'll try and find a way to defend it.
Yeah, I'll when I want to talk about how this could have been good, I'll have a lot to ask you because you have an entire podcast on the papacy, and it's like if you want to focus on bad things about the papacy, there's plenty of bad apples to choose out. They just decided to go after fictional things. I don't know why. So
yeah, go with the real stuff. No.
Yeah, there's plenty. So here's the problem. Now this is the big idea that this book gets wrong, but it's not just this book. It's a lot of things I've seen. This big idea of the sacred feminine, that the Gnostic origins of Christianity or Judaism, Dan Brown has this idea that if you go back in prehistory, then there was matriarchal society and things were better, and you can see it all over the place. And they would claim that as Christianity came along and Constantine decided to get rid of the Gnostic Gospels in one fell swoop, the sacred feminine was suppressed, and all the different things in Greek mythology like Venus and Isis or symbols of fertility and reproduction were suppressed. Here's this idea is very attractive to a lot of people, the sacred feminine, I think, especially in feminist scholarship, and I'll try avoid stepping on any landmines here. And what backs me up is a friend of mine who's an archaeologist. She's a very strong feminist, but thinks that this idea is completely ridiculous, the sacred feminine in history. The reason the idea is attractive because the 21st century movement of feminism, there's an idea that you want to think that this is how it was in humanity's innocent form, and then there was a conspiracy to back it up. However, and for example, in ancient archaeology, there's the Kukatani-Trypillian culture in Ukraine where there's archaeology that goes back 3,000 or 4,000 years. There's plenty of goddesses there. People have argued, there's only goddesses, so this is the sacred feminine. No, the ancient Greeks had plenty of goddesses, and they were perfectly fine being brutal and mistreating people all over the place. So, I mean, I get the idea that you want to think there's this kind of Garden of Eden state, but just because man's kind of early condition wasn't what it is today means that we kind of have to fictionalize it. I mean, for example, slavery goes back to the earliest ages of civilization, as far as I can tell. And we got rid of it, and I'm glad we got rid of it. And we don't have to pretend that there was some Garden of Eden state where there wasn't slavery. So just because things weren't really good at our earliest stages doesn't mean we have to pretend it is. So this is a trend I see all over the place. But anyway, that's a general thing. Now I want to get into the nitty-gritty of what he gets wrong. There is such a glorious passage in what T-Bing says, and renowned symbology professor Robert Langdon agrees about the evils of the Catholic Church, that is just like I just want to focus on one paragraph because it is a rich, rich vineyard of stupidity, and here it goes. And it's mostly repeated by Ian McKellen. Tom Hanks's Robert Langdon pushes back a little bit against it, but here it goes. The Catholic Inquisition published the book that arguably could be called the most blood-soaked publication in human history, the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Witch's Hammer, which indoctrinated the world to the dangers of free-thinking women and instructed the clergy how to locate, torture, and destroy them. So